So we're gonna start talking about a lot of the fights, and I was like thinking like where would I want to start, and I was like, okay, well actually I think logically I'd want to start relatively early in the series. I don't think we could really go too much into like fights for relatively anything prior to, I'd say, to Phantom Lord for the arc itself. We'll probably get to obviously like Natsu versus Aragorn, Gray versus Leon, Lucy versus Sherry, but stuff like that obviously is like much more kind of secluded in the arc. The other fights in it, there's not much to go over. It's like, what can I really do if I was gonna like say I could talk about Natsu versus Yuka, but I mean that's you're gonna get like maybe like a 5 or 6 minute conversation on it. I can still do it, but it's not gonna be the same level of conversation as say Elfman versus Soul. And I was a really big fan of this fight when it first dropped. I think really just the thing is Elfman as a character. It's like he's one of those guys where it's like he's really likable. He's a really cool dude. It's just really strange that Mishima, it's like not forgot about him, but it's just like he just doesn't seem to want to include him in anything. Because what's really honest, like even if you look at like currently in the series, it's not like Elfman can't fight with levels at like the current like it's just random member of Fire and Flame, random member of Diablos, random member of the Oracion sex. It's just you can have Elfman fight like Elfman versus Gaia. I think would probably end up being a fight he could win. His only thing is canonically Elfman is slow. He is not a fast fighter, so like quicker the enemy, the harder it is for him to really fight. He is a tank. So it's like, okay, anything where he's not being a tank is going to be a problem for him when it's just like, yeah, this, he's fighting somebody that's just too nimble to really kind of go about. That's whereas like you see, we're not talking about it today, but you look at like Elfman versus Bacchus and he was able to coax him into a direct, battle of wills. And this fight is important because obviously it's the first real fight we get with Elfman, because we see some of the like the skirmishes and stuff, like obviously like when Fairy Tail would go fight Phantom Lord. But this was the first big battle of his character, and it was the first, I'd say, real fight for the Element 4. Totoro just got a bad matchup, I'm gonna be honest. And then it's like he obviously it's like, oh cool, fire manipulator, but you're against a fire dragon slayer, though you have a very like you got a pretty direct, oh yeah, I can, a pretty direct way of addressing his powers. But I mean, in the long run, you're not going to be able to really beat a Slayer Wizard at the same element. You're just going to have a bad time. So with Elfman versus Soul, I like what they did a lot with the anime. One thing is like in the manga, it's weird if you haven't read through the fight in a long time and you just watch the anime. It's probably easy to forget that like the whole flashback showing everything with Lizana was way better portrayed in the anime than in the manga, because I think in the manga it was probably not viewed as like important for Elfman to go like as in depth for his backstory and to do stuff where it's like giving him way more subtlety into the death of Lizana, that his character was, I'd say like it expanded upon it greatly in the anime, into where it made it more tragic and it made it more understandable why his character is the way he was. Like he couldn't do full body takeovers. He had degrees of trouble fighting. Anytime he really wanted to bring out any of his actual full power, he pretty much just like self-gimped himself, but at the same time using up a bunch of magic in the process, because of how takeover magic works. It's not a super spammable one unless you are extremely high level. So it was a fight that it just, for him, was a bad matchup. This was one whereas obviously if it was a more of a direct, like they were just battling each other, it's hard to really say, because Elfman needed the emotional push in order to do the full body takeover, but Soul had to use a bunch of underhanded cheating moves in order to get Elfman to constantly get these hits in. But I think when you look at just his moveset, actually, I forgot to put it in here. Let me see. When you look at his moveset, like he has some pretty basic moves from Soul, and I mean, like you have Elfman, who's not really a crazy complicated fighter. He's pretty much just bring in, hit harder. When you look at Soul had some pretty solid just general attacks. He's kind of like baby version of Jura. But I mean, he's got like what do you like? Well, I know there's like three of them. He's got the actually, let me pull it up over the picture, not just over my face. He's got like just like the sand attack, where it's just like a what Sable's dance, where he just throws seemingly like a big amount of sand at somebody. He's got rock concerto. It's just like rocks from the ground or that he conjures that he just projectile shoots at his opponents. And then was it the plaster sonata or whatever it's called, sonata, and he just shoots like this big fist at his opponent. Honestly, like I like what they did in the anime because they expanded upon his magic monocle a little bit. I forget about it all the time that it's like he's got this little monocle that seems to give him information when he's looking at someone, which I give him props for because I've always liked when characters have like niche little items. Like you don't have to be like, yeah, I've got this is a primary thing I'm gonna fight with, but it's just like, oh, I have this small thing that you could get at like a store or something that just because of how my magic works, I am able to combine this niche item with it that ends up having a lot more value. But with him, I actually and I think with the monocle, I think it ends up being a lot better for the whole idea of him like knowing about people and then like further in knowing about like Elfman's trauma, and clearly there has to be a degree of mind reading involved, maybe not like full on like what Cobra and Warren do, but to a degree at least that he's able to find out a little bit of information. And when you have that, I think it makes sense to then do where he has the anime exclusive attack where he wraps somebody up in rock, and then he like does some mind messing. He just completely brings up trauma and pain, and he just completely screws with Elfman's head. But to be honest, I think the most impressive thing about him is the fact, because he is Earth based, is that he's like dodging stuff. He just goes into the ground and then reappears like a mole. I think that's actually really useful because with his ability, when you look at like the element 4, everyone other than Toromaru had the ability to like mess with their element with their body. And with Soul, it's obviously not going to be the same thing if like Juvia's water and like attacks go through. Same thing with Arya. With him, I think it's just really cool. For most places in the world, you're going to have a lot of rock, stone, and then obviously with him, sand. And I would guess plaster with his other attacks, like anything within those lines, he's able to merge with and dodge attacks around. So I wish that like we had a little bit more of that. Maybe like when Elfman went into full Beast Soul and maybe he was playing like whack-a-mole and he's having to smash all these spots. I know it was a funny thing in the anime and it wasn't like an Elfman power, but I did really like when it's like implied Soul died in the middle of their fight and then Elfman grabs his actual like soul and like shoves it back in the body and then starts just trying to smash him again. Also, they made him like 4 times bigger in the anime. He's way bigger than he actually is in the manga when he's in his Beast Soul form. And I think that this fight, when you look at the other fights, obviously you got Natsu versus Totoro. That was more of like Natsu just being annoyed and trying to work around this guy who keeps screwing with his attacks, keeping him distracted in a fight so he could have went for the power source for Jupiter. Gray versus Julia is actually probably the best one because that's the fight where they're actually about level with each other. Arya obviously is like Urza's just mad that this guy's trying to take credit for beating Makarov, and she's just like, yeah, you won through scheme tactics and like being underhanded, so don't try and boast yourself, right? It's what she says, strike his name from your conquests and your victories. So I just thought that was just really cool for her, but at the same time it's like their fight wasn't it didn't have a back and forth. It didn't have like a level of motion and flow. And Juvia and Gray have more of that. And we'll talk about that if we do, but it's very clear again with Soul versus Elfman that I think it really could have went either way, because if Elfman, but not in the way of like directly, oh yeah, they're around leaving with each other, but it's like it's clear that Soul was a better, like he had a better combat style against Elfman. Obviously, as I mentioned, Elfman is not a speed-based fighter. He constantly has problems with characters who are quick. And I think just like the fact that he has to directly attack, he doesn't really have much for range, especially at this point in the series, than even like Natsu has. Like Natsu has a couple ranged attacks, but Elfman was just straight up fist. He's just doing direct melee damage. Maybe he could pick something up and throw it, but for the most part, he's just coming at somebody with brute force. And so someone like Soul, who is able to both like slip into the ground and whatnot, and then do like the weird stuff where he like wraps around Elfman's arm. Stuff like that is really what gives him gives him an advantage in a battle like that, like actually like having an advantage. But I think I think that realistically, when you look at it, it's like that was his only real thing. Is this he'd be tricky for Elfman to try and get hits on and get around. When it came to like direct attacks, you have to keep in mind, Elfman is fighting him in his base form realistically, because he can only do the one arm takeovers at this point, and it's not like we have a direct number of like, oh, this means he was only able to access 5% of his power. But I would assume, like, I feel like at least for assumptions, if it's just your arm, you're probably getting that, whatever the percentage is of like your arm versus your whole body. Like, if it's like 20% or something, or even 10. You know what I mean? Where it's like, yeah, you could maybe go into something like that where you give it a specific, but you can't really know for sure. Whereas if you look at it like that, I gotta plug my mouse, and I just realized I have it, and it's gonna die. If you look at that, you can say, well, okay, well, why is that really that important? And Elfman, as using takeover, it's not like Gray, where Gray later gets Devil Slain and stuff, but at the same time he has this base form at the start. Meanwhile, with Elfman is a takeover wizard, so changing forms is really like his bread and butter. Like, he needs it. And so, like, it's not just him fighting Soul in his base. It's the fact that he took all of Soul's attacks in his base that makes me say, like, okay, obviously Elfman was combat style at a disadvantage, because he just was fighting somebody that was going to be really annoying for him to be able to combat the way that he fights. But when you look at, like, Elfman just ate, like, multiple attacks back to back. Like, he took 2 different spells. He got that whole like wrap around where Soul goes and tightens his arm, and he did like 2 different kicks and like does just melee attacks. And it's like, obviously Elfman's a lot bigger, but Soul is still strong, and again, Elfman is in base. So it's like you have all those. He goes for more melee attacks, gets these direct hits in that Elfman's not able to guard against because he's having issues like with his trauma. But then he hits him with I'm trying to remember how it's French, sonate platrie or something, I don't know. But he hits him with directly stated his strongest spell. And Elfman's hurt. It's not like he just like, stands there and it hits him and it does no damage. But he gets back up after. And it's not even like he's not even on like, oh, I almost was unconscious or something. Like, he sits there for a second and he's like, ow. But it doesn't really look like he's that damaged by it in reality. It's because of this. It's like, if this is his biggest spell, he's going to have to hit Elfman with this probably multiple times before he loses. And then you look at it, it's like, well, Elfman really just needed to go into his full body takeover, and then he completely demolished Soul. So this would have been a fight, I think, realistically, that would have came down to whichever one is able to really lock in first. If Soul just didn't screw around and like he didn't put Elfman in a spot where Elfman was gonna, like, if he didn't push this man through a wall into where you can see Mira Jade was in trouble, he probably would have won the fight. Whereas like Elfman really was only in trouble because of the fact that he was mentally shackled by the trauma with Lizana. So again, when you have a fight like that, I think it's really cool because it gives it like that whole layer of, it's dangerous because of a reason that we don't really know about. And then when you get onto the backstory and understand Elfman more, especially what they did in the anime, where they gave like that full flashback and stuff with Lizana and explained obviously what happened, showed Elfman after he lost control, it gives it way more impact and understanding for his character. But it also shows you what he's capable of and where his potential is and where he could be. Obviously, like, at this point, it's like he gets his full power back and he's able to completely steamroll one of the Element 4. Granted, I think out of the Element 4 still, Soul would be the weakest, just because he seemed the easiest to defeat. He seemed like he had the least impressive overall magic. And on top of that, I feel like I think some of his moves in a lot of cases would really screw him over. Like going and wrapping yourself up around someone's arm. Like, you go into anybody with like any form of, like, not even like an element, but like an energy based type of attacks, they could just blast you right there. You're putting yourself in direct range with no real defenses. But as it were, it served more as a character fight, which I really liked. I was a big fan of the fact, again, with Julia and Gray, it has to do way more so with Julia's introduction into the story, but at the same time, it's a fight. It's actually, a back and forth between them. Whereas Elfman, in a lot of ways, his fight was more with himself than with Soul, because a lot of the stuff is with his own past and his own problems. And again, the whole like hindrance of not being able to do the full body takeover was entirely a mental shackle. So when you think about it, if Elfman at the start was able just to go into his full body takeover, if he just was like, say like a day or so beforehand, no training, no special anything, Elfman like literally goes to therapy or something, and then just like he got over the level of trauma that he had. Come here. The same way that he did in the Soul fight, where it's just like, he's not like, oh man, I'm good now, no more pain. It's just, he's like, okay, I figured out how to live with this, and I figured out what I need to do in order to get to the next steps and stages of my life. Not while forgetting about Lisana, but understanding that I need to move forward the best I can. If he like went and did that, like right before all the Phantom Lord stuff, he would have walked in there and just completely steamrolled Soul. Like, there would have been no real difference. It's not like with Evergreen, where Evergreen was clearly like, she just outmatched him in, again, she was quicker, he's not good against fast people, and he just fell right into her traps. So it makes sense when you see, like, again, a fight like that, where you have a character that is fighting Elfman in his full capability, but, beating him at what he is not good at, than, say, in this fight, where yes, Elfman did get a type of, it's not really a power-up, it was more, I guess, like a, debuff break, but getting rid of this mental problem that, again, if it was what was letting Soul get the upper hand on him, but at the same time, it's what helped him win the fight in ultimately. But at the same time, if he didn't have this problem, again, if he just worked through it potentially shortly beforehand, or at some point beforehand, this wouldn't have been a problem for him in the first place. Whereas you look at Natsu versus Totamaru, Natsu was ultimately going to have the same types of problems with Totamaru. Urza was never going to lose to Arya. You were always going to have that back and forth level of flow between Julia and Gray. And that's why I think that this fight was so much more interesting, at least in, looking at the content of the fight, because it wasn't, again, in one of these, oh yeah, Natsu's just mostly annoyed, he has to figure out how to get around this guy and destroy this thing. Urza is just like, get this bitch ass guy out of here, wrecked him. Gray actually had a fight, but he was, again, as somebody that he could tell wasn't a horrible person, and it ultimately ended up being I said ultimately like 5 times. It ended up just being a chapter to introduce Julia and to get us to understand Julia's character and tie her and Gray together. So it's like, when you have a fight like this, where in a lot of ways Soul could have won, but in a lot of ways Elfman could have won. But Elfman's problems were almost entirely, if not, it's like 99%, because of his own, his own trauma and his own problems that he, at this point in the story, hadn't worked past, or at least seemingly didn't try to work past. I think it was one of those fights, though, where at the time of, like, before he decided to say, all right, fuck it, I'm going all the way in to save his sister, I think that if it wasn't for Mira Jane and the stuff with Mira Jane, then he wouldn't have really had the motivation just to say, you know what? Screw my problems, screw my own fear and my own sadness. Doesn't matter right now. My sister needs me. It doesn't matter how I feel around this thing. I need to act now. And I think that that's one of the things that made me really like Elfman's character at the start. Again, it's weird because Mishima will include him in small bits, but like he doesn't. Elfman is almost always like this kind of returning guest character, almost, where he's just like, "Hey guys, what's up? I'm here to hang out for a little bit," and they're just like, "Elfman, are you here to do whatever in this arc to really kind of pull yourself up to kind of do things?" He's like, "No. I'm about to reveal like a new form or two, and then I'm going home." He's like, I don't have time for this fighting thing. Not right now. I've got some other cool animals to go and get forms of, and at some point Beast Soul will be even cooler. But like, wait to the sequel. Wait for the next gen where I can be a very powerful looking character for a while. And it's gonna be like, we're gonna get like a next gen series, and Elfman is gonna like be fine power wise, and there's gonna be some random kid who's like not even powerful, but he's quick, and Elfman's gonna be like, what do I do? This guy is a problem. And everyone else is gonna be like, dude, he's got like you know, S class candidate levels of speed. How are you getting wrecked this easy? I don't think Elfman's that slow, but it's like clearly Elfman is always like a full tier behind everybody else in speed. And it's funny that like his first fight was like included a guy who had weird dodging attacks like this and ways to get around his attacks, but at the same time it wasn't the focus of the fight. And it was like the only time where Elfman had a really difficult opponent to kind of directly battle, I guess, other than Bach. It's like the only one where it's just like he straight up won, because with Bacchus he worked more so in the favor of like how this guy as a man and his like mentality and his own like motto and way of life, he was able to, you know, challenge that directly, that led them to their match. Whereas this was just, man, fuck this French guy. Man, get this French guy out of here. That was like all he pretty much came down to. He's like, yeah, fuck this dude, his monocle, his stupid suit. I just realized I made his suit black in this, but I think it's brown. I guess it's probably the back because I made the Elfman like a reddish brown. But as it were, I'd love to hear what other people have to say about this fight. Do you guys have the same kind of feelings that I do, or it's like it's not really like an intense battle where it's like Elfman is being pushed to every limit. It was more of like Elfman started the fight realistically having to face his limit, and it came down to, hey, doesn't matter what your trauma is in this situation. Go get in there. You got a sister to save. You got a guild to go fight for. You guys are in a war right now, and you can cry later. You can be upset later. Right now, we got to get shit done. So always good. I like a lot of Elfman's fights, to be fair. I think that Elfman is one of those characters where you either can like have him win, and it's like sweet Elfman got a pretty solid win, or it's like almost every time he loses in a way that actually makes him pretty cool. And I always appreciate that. Like, he takes a graceful L. But anyway, other than that, like I said, I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about this, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Bye. We'll do Gray versus Juvia tomorrow. But anyway, talk to you guys later.